Hi, folks. Welcome to Navigating Injustice, a conversation on race, faith, and mental health. So excited to be doing this today with a couple of members here from the research team. Hey, Hannah and Anna.
Hello. Hi. This is so exciting.
Hey.
Sandra, how are you?
Good. How's everyone doing?
Good. It's so great to see you all and to finally be doing this live after a really productive summer.
Definitely.
Seeing you all here looks so official. Cassandra, the glasses in the background.
Hi.
I put on makeup and brushed my hair for this, so it's really official. All right, well, we can go ahead and get started here. Some introductions. So I'll go first. My name is Nabil Tweme, and I am Associate Researcher at Springtide Research Institute. I specialize in faith and ethno-race, especially when it comes to Hispanic or Latino communities. So I'm really excited to be here with everyone and with my team and turn over the floor to them to introduce themselves.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna. I am a rising junior at Yale University studying psychology. And this summer, I'm working with the research team, being overseen by Nabil for my first experience in research.
Hey, everyone. My name is Cassandra Obevere. I'm currently in Philadelphia. I am a second-year Master's of Divinity student at United Lutheran Seminary, and I am currently serving as the 2022-2023 BIPAC Fellow, and I'm just grateful to be here.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Hannah. I'm a rising junior as well at Yale University studying political science and religious studies, and I'm also a research intern for the summer under Nabil for the Gen Z research project and working on navigating injustice.
Awesome. So exciting. Well, thank you all for the introductions. While we wait for Dr. Rashad to come in, I can talk a little bit about Springtide and our Navigating Injustice project we're working on for the summer. So at Springtide Research Institute, we're really committed to better understanding the inner and outer lives of young people ages 13 to 25. And that means we're really working with large and representative amounts of data that we give to organizational leaders as a kind of bird's eye view of what's going on with Gen Z today and how to better serve this population. But we as sociologists know that everything from people's beliefs to their values and so on are really shaped by what we sociologists call their social location. So things like gender and class and ability and race and ethnicity, among so many other things. So this summer we had the really cool opportunity to get together to do a deeper dive into how race and ethnicity shape young people's experiences and outcomes. Particularly when it comes to mental health, as our focus this year and beyond is on mental health at Springtide. So the result of that summer research is what we've called the Navigating Injustice study. And we're featuring all this week on Springtide's account. You might have seen a couple of posts already, just gorgeously designed by Hannah and Anna, who are also graphic designers. So we're going to be talking about the Navigating Injustice study, and we're going to kick off to Dr. Camila Moomin Rashad, and she's going to help us unpack some of the data we have on young Black Muslims as it relates to mental health. So really excited to get this going and give you a little bit of context of what we're doing here. I'm going to see if I can get Dr. Rashad here.
And as Nabil is looking for Dr. Rashad, for those of you all that are joining, do you all mind sharing just where you all are tuning in from? We're just grateful that on this, what is today, Tuesday afternoon, that you all are with us. So for those of you all that are on this live, can you just share where you all are from? We're just curious.
Yeah.
That's such a good question too, because fun because all the researchers at Tide are also living on us, and that's been cool. And then also a big part of our Justice series has been checking qualitative and or getting qualitative data, and that's been through doing interviews with young people, which have also occurred like all across the U.S., which is really considering like the scope of.
Yeah, so I see we have people from Dallas. Hey, Dallas, Iowa, Connecticut, Baltimore, Minneapolis, someone from Minnesota. See a lot of East Coast love. Jacksonville, Florida. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Yeah.
We're struggling a little bit with getting Dr. Rashad on, but
Dr. Rashad! Hey!
How are you? It's so great to see you.
I'm doing great. You all look fantastic. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Oh, us too. We are so excited. Well, let me tell everyone a little bit about you, Dr. Rashad, to really showcase like why we were so excited and grateful to have you on board with us today talking about some of this data. So Dr. Rashad is a sought after psychologist, a speaker, just an all-around expert on the intersection of race, faith, identity, mental health, racial trauma, and healing, among so many other different things. She is the founding president of the Muslim Wellness Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting healing and emotional well-being in the American Muslim community. Dr. Rashad is also the co-director of the National Black Muslim COVID Coalition, which was an initiative launched alongside the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative in order to address the need for effective planning and preparedness and organizing during the COVID-19 pandemic. So Dr. Rashad, again, so excited to have you. Can you tell us a bit about where you're joining us from and how you're connected to Springtide?
Yes. So, hi, everyone who's joined, and to my fantastic host. I'm actually joining from Chicago, Illinois. I moved here in April, but I was a longtime resident of Philadelphia for about 25 years, and I'm originally from Brooklyn. So I made my way to the Midwest, and I can walk to the lake. So it has been fantastic. I love Chicago. And I am really thrilled to be connected to Springtide as a 2022-23 research advisor. And so really what I hope to bring and lift up in these conversations is an understanding of that intersection of race, mental health, spirituality, and religion. And my particular love is for understanding the needs and also the strengths of young people.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Rashad. Such important work. Excited to talk to you again. So Cassandra, I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of a summary of some of the findings that we found on Black youth.
Yeah, definitely. So as you all know, Gen Z are youth from the ages of 13 to 25. And we found that Gen Z Black Muslims, compared to their Black peers, overwhelmingly reported that their religious faith as well as their religious practices had positively impacted their overall being and their sense of purpose. And here are just some key findings that we think are important for you all to just know. One is that Gen Z Black Muslims reported higher levels of self-esteem, agency, and confidence than their other Black religious groups. They were more likely than other Black religious groups to become more religious and spiritual over time, which is very interesting for a number of reasons. And I'm curious, Dr. Rashad, to hear what you think about that. And then lastly, Gen Z Black Muslims were more likely than other Black religious groups to feel connected to a higher power, all humanity and nature, and the list goes on and on. So these findings, suggest that Islam plays a significant role in the identity development of Black youth who identify as Muslim. However, as we know, many Black Muslim youth are often overlooked in the study of religion because of social scientific standards about population size and the ability to replicate these findings in order to see if these findings are statistically significant. So while these standards are important, I'm just curious to kind of hear from you, Dr. Rashad, your thoughts on how this particular group their voices not being amplified in research causes them to be invisibilized, their experience to be
Yeah.
invisibilized, as well as reproduce inequality of their experiences. So as you are, currently a social scientist research, and I'm saying a lot in a mouthful, I'm just curious to
Yes.
hear if you've encountered similar findings in your work and research, or just your thoughts in general based on some of the findings I've found, or just the importance of this conversation as it pertains to doing the work of social justice and anti-racist research.
Yes. So I am actually just really thrilled and overwhelmed that Springtide has chosen to really, really zero in on this research and think about, what are some of the nuances that might be missing in other research on young people and faith and mental health. I was actually feeling an immense sense of validation because the findings that you all gathered supports the research that I've done through my doctoral work. So my dissertation focused on Black Muslim emerging adulthood, identity, and psychological well-being. And so I focused on between 18 and 25, and I did over 30 in-depth interviews with many young Black Muslims. In fact, the title of my dissertation I took from a quote from one of those interviews, and that person said, "I'm proud to be Muslim, I'm proud to be Black, I'm good. Everybody else is tripping," right? And that really summarized all of the work that says, yes, there is an awareness of inequalities, what you mentioned in terms of being minoritized and invisibilized. There's the challenges, especially when we think about religious discrimination and racial violence. And there was an overwhelming sense of, I am fully clear and aware of the challenges that I face as a young Black Muslim. And I wouldn't want to be anything else, right? I would not for a second want to sort of disguise or hide those aspects of my identity that I find so much pride in. So for some, that may seem almost like a contradiction, right? Like, how do we reconcile both the very real reality of racial violence and religious discrimination, and what you said, this reporting higher levels of self-esteem, of a sense of well-being, of being connected to religion? And I would say, because those things, both the racial identity and religious identity, serve as a protective factor, right? Particularly when you're thinking about the environments, the context in which those young Black Muslims are growing. What they're reaching for is that sense of belonging, of nurturing, of affirmation, and an internalized, really healthy sense of one's racial self acts as armor, as kind of fortitude, as or a fortification. It is also a really deep well from which many young Black Muslims find hope, find purpose and meaning. And so having those minoritized identities, one would think would lead to a lesser sense of self-esteem, or perhaps a greater sense of internalized inferiority. However, what this research and also my research really illustrates is that those two things can be present. And at the same time, that young person, depending on the types of environments they're in and the role models they have, can really see with I think a very clear eye what those challenges are, and at the same time have a full and deep and expansive sense of appreciation for one's identities, and for the unique ways in which they can be in the world like no other. So I'm happy to kind of delve in further, but I was just looking at your findings, like, this is just incredible and definitely worth us sort of unpacking.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Rashad. I'm so excited to dig deeper on so many of the things you already touched on. And just to kind of start off, I'm wondering about the Muslim Wellness Foundation.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, it's a nonprofit organization. It's dedicated to promoting healing and well-being in the American Muslim community. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about why you founded MWF. Yeah.
Sure, sure. So Muslim Wellness Foundation, I founded it out about a decade ago in Philadelphia. And it really did arise from the need to understand the particular concerns and also topics that were emerging within the community. At the time, I was managing strategic planning and development for the city of Philadelphia. And there was no specific conversation looking at, well, what are the services? What are the sort of levels of awareness and resources and support that are needed by American Muslims in the city? And from there, from that particular initiative, founded a nonprofit, Muslim Wellness Foundation, which continued to explore initially, how do we reduce stigma related to mental health? How do we provide sort of basic levels of awareness and knowledge for American Muslims to begin to assess and think about their own behavioral health needs? What we quickly realized was that it's insufficient to simply think about reducing stigma, right? And an over-reliance on sort of services neglects the fact that within communities there are ways that, you know, community members inherently think about healing that may not be reflected in sort of the services that are provided, right? And so we began to look at not just sort of the individual needs of American Muslims, but collectively, as well as how do people pull from their culture, ethnicity, sort of spiritual practice that really leads to a path where they can find multiple ways to begin to address some of the wounds that they experience, both personally, right, and also collectively as a community. And so where we've evolved the organization is to give really strong consideration to the impact of oppression, of white supremacy, of anti-Black racism, and of Christian hegemony on how people experience the world and the way they are in the world. And within Muslim Wellness Foundation, one of our really signature programs has been the establishment of the Black Muslim Psychology Conference. And that was back in 2015, and it started out as a one-day conference. We had about 100 attendees, and then we paused because of the pandemic, but at its height, it was a 3-day conference. It included a collegiate forum, an award ceremony, a round table of imams who came together to discuss community issues. And what we discovered in sort of the growth of the conference is that there really is a need to talk specifically about Black Muslim psychology, about well-being, because as you mentioned at the top of the conversation, there isn't enough attention being paid to all of the interactions and the impact it has on one's sense of sort of health and well-being and also identity. And so we've been really excited about work to expand those conversations and to think more about what's called intersectional invisibility, that if you're seen as a minority within a minority group, that's another way in which your particular needs can go unaddressed.
Thank you for that, Dr. Rashad. I want us, if it's possible, to continue talking about how you mentioned that for Black Muslim youth, that their racial identity as well as their religious identity act as protective factors.
Yes.
So that makes me wonder, specifically when we look at like Black mental health overall, as you know, there is definitely a crisis among Black mental youth when it comes to experiencing significant mental health crises. And then when we add this layer of, you know, religious identity, I was wondering, you know, just based on your own research and your own personal experience and just working with Black Muslim youth, if you found if there were like differences in the mental health challenges that Black Muslim youth face today compared to other Black young people of different faiths.
Yes. So I would say one of the significant issues that I think continues to go either unaddressed or just not widely known is the impact of anti-Muslim bigotry and Islamophobia. And there are two ways in which this occurs. So looking kind of in broader American society, the implicit biases that people have about the practice of Islam, about when a young person is becoming, right, this is what's called like developmentally appropriate, right? As you get older, you become more curious about all of your ideas. However, for Muslim youth, there is often an assumption or an association that deeper or greater exploration into one's religious identity is conflated with radicalization, right? And so if someone says, well, I want to learn more, maybe I'm reading or I'm joining groups or I'm even just Googling online, right? The reality is, given the intensity of the surveillance of the community, even a Google search, right, might be flagged, right? So if you're looking for information, if you're joining groups, or if you're just kind of chatting online, trying to link with other people who are curious in their own sort of Muslim spiritual practice, these can be red flags, right? And so young people are very much aware of the kind of surveillance of the community that's very prevalent. And so when something that is broadly considered developmentally appropriate is flagged as potential of or the growth of extremism for Muslim young people, there's somewhat of a chilling effect, right? Or it's seen as, instead of applauded, as like, wow, someone wants to know, like, why do I practice? Why do I believe this way? What are certain things I'm still wrestling with? I find that there are some contradictions that I have to resolve sort of within me in my practice. That's normal, right? That is encouraged. However, for young Muslims, that is seen as somewhat of a danger sign. Right, so that's one factor. The other is that for young Black Muslims, they are dealing with the presence of religious discrimination, right, in broader American society, and also the presence of anti-Black racism within the faith community, right? And so there's, again, kind of given the impact of, Islamophobia and the propaganda associated with it, most people don't even think about young Black Muslims, right, as experiencing religious discrimination, or are not seen as a typical Muslim, right? And so when you're really wrestling with, kind of on both fronts, right, the religious minoritization and the racial discrimination within one's faith group, those are two factors that can contribute to the distress that is felt. But again, I think what the research highlights is that while those two stressors, if you will, are present, what acts as protective, nurturing, is the presence of community that provides the validation and the affirmation. And in healthy racial identity development, for Black people in general, is the presence of spirituality as a source of resilience, of pride, and of support. So when one is engaged really deeply in a spiritual community, in a community in which one's racial identity is validated, there is healthy exploration and growth and a sense of connectedness. So I think it's important to understand kind of both sides of the coin, right? That there are the challenges and the stressors, and those identities which elicit that kind of discrimination from others are actually a really deep source of pride and joy for those young people as well.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's interesting because you're mentioning all these things that are affecting young Black Muslim youth's mental health, like anti-Black racism, Islamophobia, sometimes compounded.
Yes.
Yet with like community building and positive racial information and all of these. A big part of our project this summer is trying to see how young people measure their own mental health and about it. One thing that we have that like Springtide data suggests is that young Black Muslims are flourishing in mental health, even like despite all these things that you've already mentioned, right? And that they're reporting some of the highest levels of agency and self-esteem and confidence out of all youth. You already like that you're thinking and how those would positively impact young mental health, but how if you would like to touch further on how you interpret these findings, and then even how you would what insight you would give other people who aren't like maybe as connected or as much of an expert in these fields. How do you read these findings and try to actually know what they are suggesting?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question because it feels almost like very perplexing, right? Like, how do you make sense of kind of the overwhelming amount of stressors that are present, and which I call like social toxins, right? These are things that if we could visibly see them in the world, right, it would look like smog, it would look like pollution. But when we're thinking about kind of social and mental health, they're invisible to us, right? Um, Yet what the findings suggest is that when there is a connection to that faith.
Dr. Rashad, we're like losing you a little bit, hopefully.
Hopefully we'll get Dr. Rashad back in a second here. It's always the risk with these. No, we lost Dr. Rashad.
I'll jump on.
But yeah, I mean, it was, I hope we can get Dr. Rashad back here in a second, but I really liked what she was saying is like, I think from an outside perspective, it can look paradoxical. Like there are these social toxins and there's this real complexity of issues that young Black Muslims are facing, that, you know, I think without understanding this community, you might say, well, we might expect poor mental health outcomes. And yet when we're looking across different faith groups within the Black community, you know, Black Muslims really have streets of flourishing, of agency, of self-esteem. I think we're getting Dr. Rashad back here in a second. And so such an important focus is also in how one cultivates joy. And that's something, a focus that maybe gets left behind sometimes, that is so important, especially when we're thinking about actionable ways to, oh, Dr. Rashad, you're back.
Hey.
Okay, let's try again.
So we were just talking about how, you know, to some people, this finding might be paradoxical.
Yeah.
So the importance of being like, okay, well, let's shift focus a little bit and think about cultivating joy. Yes. And think about how different identities, well, really complicated and have these intersectional social toxins, as you say, which I just love that phrase.
Nibia, I think we lost.
Oh no.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Yeah, so I'll pick up where I think I dropped, but that when we talk about Islam as being a way of life, one of the young people that I interviewed talked about Islam providing a roadmap, right? A roadmap of purpose. They said that, you know, in some instances, Islam and the practice felt almost like a big brother guiding them through their lives. So given even the religious emphasis on justice, on community, these are really deeply held values. And so the practice of Islam providing sort of a discipline and a way of understanding even trials and challenges within one's life as an opportunity for growth. And so what young people have shared with me is that engaging in spiritual practice is a source of coping, right? Being able to make daily prayers. They mentioned being able to do meditation or dhikr, even having conversations with other Black Muslims about their experiences are ways to keep them grounded, as a way of reducing the likelihood that they're internalizing those negative messages that they receive in the world. And one of the I thought was really amazing to discover in these conversations with young Black Muslims is that they felt that their unique intersection of identity actually gave them an opportunity to serve as bridge builders, right? That because of these multiple minoritized identities, I understand the marginalization of other people, right? It's not the same, but we have similar challenging experiences, and we can use our insights, our perspectives to actually help build solidarity across groups. And so I think there's a way that, at least in my experience and my work with young Black Muslims, I think the ingredients that lead to, I believe, some of the findings that you have here, um, is is a broader understanding of one's purpose and meaning because of those identities. That it gives opportunity, it gives perspective, it gives insight and wisdom, and the practice itself of Islam provides a way of coping emotionally, of providing kind of a broader understanding of why certain events occur, and the camaraderie and feeling of connectedness and belonging in the community gives them a different kind of explanation for why, right, perhaps negative experiences and microaggressions occur. It's not one's fault, right? It's not due to some kind of deficiency in oneself or identity. Rather, the explanation is perhaps this is an opportunity, right, for me to make connections, to build bridges, to serve as an example, perhaps, of what it means to be rooted in faith and one's sense of self in the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about. Like, Islam as like a way of life is it perfectly points into like a question about belonging, community, experience. And so I guess if you can just touch on a little like what those specific spiritual and emotional benefits of belonging to community for young Black Muslims might be.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I wanted to, I guess, maybe clarify is that when we're talking about community, it may not be a formal religious institution, right, that young people are referencing, right? There's a fellowship that was established by Muslim Wellness Foundation in 2017, specifically for Black Muslim emerging adults, called the Deeply Rooted Fellowship. And it's for those that were identified as emerging leaders, that were really curious about, connecting with community. And they themselves consider that fellowship, right, that growing, we have almost 45 fellows at this point, that is a community, right, it's an affinity space, of other young Black Muslims. They speak and share amongst themselves about, what are some aspects of practice that they find challenging? What do they find really rewarding? How are they making sense of, again, some of the contradictions that they feel they have to reconcile? How can they be truly, authentically themselves within their practice? So I think traditionally, right, historically, we think about a mosque, right? But the communities that young people are forming can take place outside of a mosque. Many of them do. And so those communities that are flourishing allow for, I think, deep curiosity, and for young people to talk about what do they really need in order to be really fully, authentically themselves. And that's what they mention is around having role models, mentors, even family that help instill in them a sense of pride in who they are. So I remember one young Black Muslim sharing with me about sort of feeling like, well, how can I be both, Southern and Black and Muslim, when what most people think of as Muslim is typically South Asian and Arab, right? So within sort of the broader American imagination, I may not even exist or be seen. And then within the Muslim community, experiencing, racial microaggressions, there's a period of time in which I think the presence of those sort of negative factors do impact in a negative way. However, connecting, right, having affinity spaces that say, like, listen, I'm struggling with the same things, right? I also need a sense of grounding and of affirmation, they're able to provide that for one another. And it is often through reminders of spiritual practice, and that spirituality and sort of connection to faith fluctuates over time, right? At one point in your life, you feel really strong, and it's something that you don't question. And then there are other times, perhaps you're experiencing a loss or something that's really deeply disappointing or devastating. Of course, I think we can all sort of think of a point in our lives where we felt kind of a loss of meaning and purpose, right, connected to spirituality. And so I think having the ability to gather with other young Black Muslims who are experiencing similar things, and be reminded of, just being able to call on God to think about even sort of the 99 attributes of God, right, that we refer to as Muslims, of God's mercy and compassion, of being patient but perseverant. I think these are sort of the spiritual coping mechanisms that actually deepen one's faith, even when it feels a little shaky, but leads to, I think, greater curiosity and exploration.
Thank you, Dr. Rashad. So as we come to the end of our conversation, we're grateful for the many ways that you've provided us with some rich historical, social, and cultural context to help us understand the lived experiences of Black Muslim youth. So now I would like for us to transition quickly to you providing insight on some practical ways that organization leaders can better support young Black Muslim youth. And then more importantly, how can people follow you and the resources that are coming out of the Muslim Wellness Foundation as well?
Yes. So I think, as far as organizations and, what I consider sort of the obligation of adults in providing nurturing, affirming resources and support to young Black Muslims, I think the first suggestion or recommendation I would have is to listen. Right, to sort of suspend first identify what those biases might be, right? And then really think about how do I listen to young people generally, right? How do I listen to young Black Muslims specifically who have a very unique experience? What I try to demonstrate in my work is that I think that young people have something to teach me all the time, right? That I have a very particular area of expertise, yet I'm going to ask questions of that community, of that specific young Black Muslim community first. Right. What do I need to know? What do I need to correct about perhaps the way that I've been relating to you? What have I done well? Right. What are some areas where I need to sort of think about kind of power and privilege and authority in relationship to young people? So I think in order to serve as a better leader to young people is to do that reflection and that listening. I think the next sort of recommendation that I would offer is to think about how space is allocated, whether that's virtual space or physical space, for people to just connect, right? And to feel seen, to feel safe. I think when we're aware of the prevalence of racial violence, of religious discrimination and violence, you may have heard about the 4 Muslim men that were murdered in New Mexico. I mean, that's present, right, for top of mind for many Muslims. And so I think as a leader of an organization, or even say like college campuses, wherever you find young people, am I aware of their, right? Am I plugged into those events that might fly under the radar, maybe not mainstream news, but it's definitely part of the conversation that they may be having as it impacts their own lives. And I think the listening, the reflection, the context are so important, because it means that young people are not having to do so much explaining, right? Like we can ask really pointed, and I think really good questions when we have an understanding and not kind of placing the onus on them to teach us something. How can people follow this work? MWF National, we're in the midst of our own sort of brand redesign and relaunch after a decade, and being able to, I think, really clearly articulate that we are concerned about the impact of oppression, of white supremacy, of anti-Blackness and Christian hegemony on the mental health of American Muslims broadly, but as it impacts young people. We're a very young faith community. I think it's something of about 40% of American Muslims are in the emerging adult sort of stage of life. So if we're not concerned about, what's helpful for young people, what their needs are, what their strengths are, as a community, we're not going to thrive if that is not sort of a priority for us. So you can definitely find us on social media. You can find me on social media at Dr. Mama Cam on Instagram, but also Camila Rashad on Twitter. I have two young people myself. My son is 17, my daughter is 19, I'm headed to college. So for personal reasons, this is something that I'm also wanting to get right. I don't always, right? Talk to my daughter, she may be like, I have a story to tell y'all about my mama. But I think what I'm so inspired by when it comes to young Black Muslims is how sophisticated they are in understanding themselves and the ways that they really cultivate and seek out joy and creativity. The young people in the Deeply Rooted Fellowship that Muslim Wellness established, they astound me every day. And so I really want to see more stories of young Black Muslims, both the challenges that they face and also the incredible work that they do despite those challenges, be lifted up, not as exceptions, right? But as, ways that they are in the world that I think can serve as an example for everyone.
Hey, Dr. Rashad, that was incredible. Seriously, I can't overstate how grateful we are to have had this conversation with you today. It was so much fun, so insightful, and just great to connect with you. So just to kind of close out here, I want to ask Hannah and Anna, our Springtide interns, if there's anything else they'd like to share with you all about the Navigating Injustice Project and what to look out for this week.
Yeah, we just want to thank you, Dr. Rashad, for your expertise, your kindness. We also just want to emphasize that this is not an isolated conversation. So everybody listening can follow along. You get to see the other facets of our projects. We have posts that are relating more on in mental health for young people of color. Generally, we are talking about like coping through challenging times. We're talking about belonging in religious spaces and support networks for people of color. So definitely everyone feel free to follow along.
Yeah, and everyone make sure you follow along with Dr. Rashad and her team at the Muslim Wellness Foundation as well.
Thank you all so much for being here today, everyone in our audience for hanging out.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Bye.
Take care.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
Have a good one.